أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Friends, Assalamu alaikum. Personally, I've had um, experience with Jama'at Tabligh, also known as Tablighi Jama'at, and I have spent some time with them in my younger days. And so I know their MO, and I would like to mention some of the pros and some of the cons of this particular movement. But before I do that, I want to mention the fact that this is a group or this is a movement that is not a divine institution, nor can it be said that this is an institution that Allah has selected for our time as the main representation of His faith. Because the very fact that in recent years this group fractured into two major factions, and it's not that one faction is very large and the other is like a splinter offshoot, both of these factions are almost equal in terms of following and in terms of activity. It was a leadership dispute, but there were also some differences over policy, and which resulted in the fracture of Jamaat al-Tabligh and now into two major groups. One of the groups is led by an Amir, by a single individual Amir named Saad Kandhlawi, Maulana Saad Kandhlawi. And the other group does not have a single leader. It's led by a sort of a council of equals. And obviously, the structure of the group that has Saad Kandhlawi as an Amir, as their actual Amir, is the superior model because that's the Islamic model. The Islamic model is that the Jama'ah of the Muslims should have a single Imam, a single Amir. It's not meant to be led by a council of of multiple executives that are equals among each other. Rather, it's supposed to be an Amir, and the Amir is supposed to be lifelong. That's the system of Khilafah. That's the system of Imara that Islam has given us. And so, in terms of structure, in terms of how the group is structured and organized, the faction of Saad Kandhlawi is the superior faction. And throughout the Muslim world, throughout the world in general, even here in Canada, I had opportunity to spend time with both factions. It's very interesting how they both now have their own separate um, conventions and activity, and they do not cooperate with each other because they've totally broken with each other. And it's even mentioned that during the breakup of this movement, that at times it became a violent clashes between the two factions, and people were even killed. And that clearly shows you that Jamaat al-Tabligh, this is not a purely Islamic movement. This is not a movement that Allah has blessed particularly as the manifestation of Islam in our time. Otherwise, it would not have fractured in such a way with violence and bloodshed between each other's factions, totally, bringing the movement into disrepute. And already the movement is on decline. So that's something I want to mention at the outset. Jamaat al-Tabligh, what is this Jamaat? That's inshallah what I want to discuss. This is a movement that began in the 1920s in India as a effort to basically counter the Shuddhi Tahrik. The Shuddhi Tahrik in the 1920s was an effort by zealous right-wing Hindus to reconvert Muslims to Hinduism. The majority of Muslims in India are either converts to Islam from Hinduism or descendants of converts to Islam from Hinduism, including myself. That our ancestors were Hindus, and they were enlightened enough, and they were spiritually enlightened, and they were guided by Allah to leave their ancestral religion of Hinduism and to convert to a superior, albeit a foreign religion, That is Islam. Islam is a foreign religion to India, came from the Middle East. It was brought to India by people who were not Indians. And it was spread in India basically by the Sufis and the mystics who were not racially Indian. They tended to come from Turkestan or from Afghanistan, from Central Asia or from Iran or from the Arab world. And they came to India, and the local Indians were impressed with them, and they converted to Islam en masse at their hands. And so there is, of course, this is a beauty of Sufism, is that this is a religious movement within Islam, within normative Orthodox Sunni Islam, which is the catalyst for the spread of Islam, especially in the Indian subcontinent. And in the 1920s, the Hindus of the Shuddhi Tahrik attempted to reconvert Muslims back to Hinduism. And they were particularly focusing their efforts on those Muslims in rural areas of northern India who were very recent in their conversion to Islam and who were not really grounded in Islam, in Islamic culture and Islamic identity. Rather, they were suffering from the heresy of syncretism, where they still had some Hindu sort of customs and religious ideas and practices, and celebrating the Hindu festivals, and not really properly distinguishing themselves from Hindus, and totally separating themselves from their Hindu heritage. And so they were vulnerable to this aggressive Shuddhi Tahrik, which managed to convert many of these ignorant and newly converted Muslims back to Hinduism. And so there was an apostasy crisis going on there. And so this motivated the founder of Jama'at Tablighi, an individual named Maulana Ilyas Kandhlawi. Maulana Ilyas Kandhlawi, he founded this effort, and it was motivated by wanting to protect the faith of the Muslims and to purify their faith and to make them stronger and more committed Muslims. And it emphasizes personal devotion to Allah. It's based on six principles. It's based on faith, iman. It's based on the prayer, the five daily prayers. It very much emphasizes the salah, emphasizes coming to the mosque. It emphasizes purity of intention. It emphasizes zikr and remembrance of Allah. And it emphasizes goodwill toward other Muslims, humanitarian charitable activity toward other Muslims, which they call ikramul muslimin, feeding other Muslims and doing charitable work for Muslims, helping Muslim brothers. And the last point, which makes it very unique, is its focus on da'wat ilallah, calling people to Allah, calling people back to Islam, calling people back to the faith. And for this, it has a you could say a policy, or a sort of an organized effort of doing tabligh, in which they volunteer to travel around the world, or around their country wherever they can, in which they go to a locality, they settle in a mosque, and then they go out to the neighborhood, the vicinity of that mosque, and they invite the Muslim people to come to the mosque to listen to a what they call a bayan, which is basically a religious sermon, inviting people to join them in the effort of tabligh. That's the purpose. So, what are the pros and cons of this movement? This you could say this is the largest Islamic movement in the world. Now, of course, it's no longer the largest organized because it's broken up into two factions. But as a general tendency, it's the largest religious tendency in the Muslim world, due to the sheer numbers and the very success rate of this group. This group, or this movement, it has to be appreciated for, uh, you know, reviving religiosity within Muslim society where it is active. This is something it must be appreciated for. That the activity that they do, inviting people to come to the mosque, inviting people to pray, inviting people to go out in the path of Allah and to give da'wah and to give tabligh, there can be no criticism of this. This is what Islam desires. Also, they are not modernists. They are not. They do not call for modernity, and they are opposed to cultural westernization. So they are a conservative, traditional force in that sense as well. They have to be appreciated for that. And usually, if you go out and you see the people who are involved in Jamaat al-Tabligh, that they are in their apparent, in their dress and in their appearance, that they look like conservative and religious Muslims. They wear white clothes predominantly. They wear the kameez, long kameez. They wear a kufi or a turban, which is usually white color. They keep longer beards. They they very much are unique in shaving the mustache. That's their sort of a trademark sign of this group. But this is shows you how they are very much committed to Islamic culture and to Islamic identity. And this is for this they must be appreciated. They must be credited, and they must be helped with as well. So these are some of their positive things. What about the negatives of Jamaat al-Tabligh? There are some cons. There are some points of criticism. Number one, it is a movement that basically seeks numbers and wants to gather people of different Muslims of different background. Doesn't matter what sect they belong to. Doesn't matter what school of thought. Just wants to gather them all, and does not want to reform the Muslim society where it matters as well. In terms of, for example, in the Indian subcontinent, there's a huge problem and a huge tendency of grave worship and other sort of polytheistic practices and customs. And Jamaat al-Tabligh sort of ignores that because it doesn't want to get involved in controversy. And this is the problem with Jamaat al-Tabligh. It doesn't want to be controversial. It wants to be a group which is only about sweet talk. Just wants to sweet talk. Doesn't have any sort of uh, critical message that is reminiscent of the ancient prophets. The ancient prophets came and they were not popular people. They came to their people and their people rejected them. Their people persecuted them because of their message. And they were not sweet talkers, of course. They were prophets. They were prophesying doom. They were prophesying destruction if unless the nation repents. They were calling for repentance. They were strongly speaking out against idolatry and other evil, immoral behavior that had afflicted the society whom they were sent to. And Jamaat al-Tabligh says that, we are working upon the pattern of the prophets. We are preaching like the prophets preach. We're going out there. We're going out to the people because now the institution of prophecy has been terminated formally, but informally, it continues in efforts like Jamaat al-Tabligh, which is true. But they are not imitating the prophets in a more consequential sense by preaching the message of Islam without regard for whether it's going to be controversial or not, without compromising it, without watering it down, without trying to just get popular and get the people, get the masses of the people. Because the actually the success of Jamaat al-Tabligh in gathering masses of people around it is one of the indications it's not exactly upon the truth 100%. Because if it was a purely Islamic movement on the truth 100%, it would not be a popular movement, believe me. But you think about the fact that the representatives of Jamaat al-Tabligh, the major ones, are extremely popular and extremely well known and have millions of followers. Take, for example, Maulana Tariq Jamil, considered the most popular Islamic preacher in the world, not just in the Indian subcontinent, in the world. Most recognized name. And he is an individual who is extremely popular, but he does not preach anything controversial. He's just a sweet talker. And he calls for unity with deviated sects like the Shia and the Barelvis, and doesn't want to speak against their misguidance, doesn't want to speak against the social ills. I mean, does not want to make that the focus. You might see in a lecture or in a sermon that they'll mention something about the social ills, but they don't make it a focus of their activity to denounce something which is totally evil that has taken root in the society. They just stick to those six principles which I mentioned. And so they don't broaden their activity. And this is why they don't affect a total reformation in the society where they are active. Well, this is one of the problems of this group. Another problem of this group is that theologically they do not have much knowledge of what is pure Islamic theology, and they don't emphasize knowledge. They don't emphasize obtaining knowledge. They don't have this. They're not studious. That's not their disposition. Is they're not really people of the madrasa. They're not really people of studying the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith. Rather, in fact, they even have a sort of an element of discouraging their members from taking the path. Just saying, you know what, just dedicate your life to this work, and don't put too much effort into going to learn the Quran and the Sunnah and to learning the Islamic sciences. And so this is a huge weakness and a huge shortcoming of the group, which many of the ulama criticize them for. In fact, even the ulama of their own maslak, which is the Deobandi school of thought, even they criticize them for this attitude and say that, you know, this group is taking the form of an actual sect. It's no longer just a reform movement within Sunni Islam. It's taking on the form of an actual sect, and you know, with their own literature, with their own ulama, with their own preachers, and those who get involved in it, they separate them from the mainstream of the ummah. So they're beginning to adopt cult-like tendencies. They're beginning to adopt separatist and cult-like tendencies, where, you know, on one hand they're involved in tabligh and dawah and in preaching to all of the Muslims and trying to bring the Muslims together, but on the other hand, those who get involved with them and who get really close to them, then you start to see cult-like activity being cult-like mentality being imposed upon them. That, you know, be with us, and, you know, the other Muslims, you know, well, we're just there to preach them, but we try to socially try to avoid them and not get involved with their affairs. So it becomes a parallel sort of a ummah. And this is the danger, a huge danger of Jama'at al-Tabligh. Inshallah, we'll speak on this topic in subsequent videos in depth. Just kind of give you a basic background of this group and some basic criticism, and also some basic praise for which we should credit this group for. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.